everybody, and happy holidays. This is Dr. Logan Martin and James Junkin hosting the Risk Matrix podcast, coming to you with our after the catch type episodes here on the Risk Matrix. We've got several esteemed guests today, and what we're going to do is we're going to talk about tales from our travels in safety, tales from the crypt, or almost the crypt, if you want to call it that, or after the catch stories of things that we've learned throughout our career. But before we get to that, first of all, James, roll tide.
Roll Tide. Hey, Dr. Martin, happy holidays, Merry Christmas. Looky here. I got no sleigh with reindeer. I got no sack on my back. But you don't see me coming in a big black Cadillac. It's Christmas time, baby. Roll Tide. Santa Claus is back in town.
I saw some horns there. We don't mean to offend anybody, but we're a Roll Tide team here. Before we get started, everybody knows that we're powered by Veriforce. And before we introduce our guests, what we'd like to do is have a word from our sponsor today, which is Basic 7.0, coming from Safeland.
Veriforce is proud to announce the latest version of our Safeland USA accredited course called Basic Orientation 7.0. This is our flagship course that has been taken by over 1.6 million students nationwide. The newest version of this course is shorter than the last version, with condensed training and updated multimedia, but it still includes the same topics as previous courses. As always, the Safeland orientation remains with this employee through the career. It eliminates the redundancy of multiple orientations, and it stores all the training records in a single centralized database for everyone to use. Also, we offer two solutions for getting the training. You can either seek out Safeland training from one of our third-party providers, or you can send one of your instructors through our Train the Trainer program to teach your own employees. If you're interested in learning more, please contact our training sales department at 888-482-9101. That's 888-482-9101, or you can email us at trainingsales@veriforce.com.
Hey, everybody, we're back, and I'm going to let James open this up for discussion. James, take it away.
Man, I really like this episode. This is sort of a Christmas present that Dr. Martin and I want to give back to our listeners in the form of an episode featuring behind-the-scenes safety professionals that power Veriforce. So today we've got members of our strategic advisory board, one of the founders of the legacy company, PEC Safety, Mr. Pete Eustis, Veriforce master trainers, and Veriforce company safety professionals, all here discussing their personal struggles, their experiences, dangers, real world examples from their careers as they seek and sought to bring workers home safe from high hazard jobs. So thank you all, gentlemen, for joining us today. Let's introduce our esteemed guest here to our listeners. So Chris Gafford, member of our Strategic Advisory Board. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Chris Gafford, I'm the HSE manager for Ring Energy here in the Permian Basin, oil and gas operator. I've been doing safety about 22 years, somewhere around in there.
All right. Chris Kuiper.
Yeah, Chris Kuiper, retired, quote unquote, from 45 plus year of doing environmental health and safety work in consulting and in industry. And in the last 5 years, I was teaching at a Southeastern Louisiana University, teaching OSH students there.
Mr. Pete Eustis.
Thank you, Chris.
Well, thank you, James. I guess I've been in the industry for quite some time now. I started in 75 with Liquid Air, and in 93 went to work with PEC, and have just retired from PEC starting November 1st. So it's been quite a career there. Looking forward
happy
to
retirement.
Yeah.
I don't stay retired too long.
Well, yeah.
You do.
Let's just say I'm off the full-time payroll. How's that sound?
There you go. There you
Welcome to the club, Pete.
Yeah.
Work is hard just for less money. I like that.
Yeah, that's
Mr. David Bates, another member of our Strategic Advisory Board.
Good morning, everyone. My name is David Bates, and I was with OSHA for 36 years before I retired about 4 or 5 years ago. And I worked with OSHA as a compliance officer, as an assistant area director. The last 10 years, I was the area director in Oklahoma City, and did a number of details in Washington, D.C., at the Gulf oil spill and Houma, Louisiana. And I'm retired now, doing a little teaching for UTA and on the advisory board for Veriforce. And I'm also on the planning committee for the OSHA Oil and Gas Conference with UTA. So,
Man,
Thank
look
you.
keeps me
at that.
busy in retirement.
You're a little busy. Pete, that's your future.
Yeah.
Our next guest is not a safety professional, although he could be, but he's a procurement specialist at Veriforce, and his passion is bridging the gap between procurement professionals and safety professionals so we can accomplish our mission. But welcome, Mr. Sam Rayborn.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I'm tickled to be here, especially around with such, as you said, esteemed safety professionals. I do take safety very seriously. I've been in this industry, or the industry of procurement now, for about 25, almost 30 years, about 10 of which was directly in the upstream oil and gas space. So I do understand a lot of the challenges keeping people safe out, especially offshore and on well sites. So I'm looking forward to participating.
Yeah, Sam, thanks for being here. Mr. Carl.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm a EHS professional with about 40 years experience and mostly in the oil and gas industry. Also a member of the Strategic Advisory Board for Veriforce, and like David, a member of the advisory board for the Oil and Gas Conference, UTA Oil and Gas Conference.
Well, that's good. Hey, if I can twitch your arm a little bit, I do have an abstract I've submitted.
All right.
This is the oil and gas. Is it the oil and gas conference? Because he wants to speak about 5 times at that, if possible.
Yeah.
I think he was twisting his arm the other way. Hey, I
see.
So I don't have to.
Fellas, welcome to the show. Many of you have been on here before, but today what we're really looking for to give our listeners a flavor of your long and storied careers are similar to what we look at when we see what is the name of the show, James?
Deadliest Catch After the Catch with the captain.
Deadliest Catch with the captains after the catch, talking about the stories about almost did happen, things we've seen, etc. Again, I mentioned earlier in the show Tales from the Crypt, but Tales also almost from the Crypt in safety, because we know that our near misses or some of our hard lessons in the field have been pretty scary. So does anybody want to start us off with a good story from their past? Don't be shy.
So I can tell you kind of what made me interested in getting into the safety business, which has to do with some stuff like this. So my dad was we call him pumper back then. Now we call him lease ops. But he, he's driving around in the field checking on these wells and stuff. Works for a little independent operator. And I was in junior high and high school, and during the summer, spring break, things like that, I would go to work with him. And anyway, small little operator, no safety to speak of. And this is in the early 90s. I know most of these guys here saying they have enough experience. They were around with wooden derricks and whatnot. People were getting splinters, not cutting fingers off. But anyway, so this is the early 90s, and there's no safety. And my dad's run partner, his name was Kenny, was on a location next to us. And just going about the normal day, and that's about 15 or so. And we heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the location next over to us, and went over there to check on Kenny. And the pumping unit there, the pump jack had no guard over the flywheels and the belt and everything, no working brake. And so Kenny got the bright idea that he was just going to get a rock and jam it in there to stop it where he needed it stopped. And that didn't work out real well. It ended up cutting off his thumb. And so I just remember that I was 15, and there's blood everywhere, it looks like a murder scene, and he's hollering, and we're not anywhere close to a hospital. days before cell phones. You know, we didn't all have cell phones and stuff. So it's get this guy's bleeding everywhere in the truck. And anyways, so at 15 years old, it made an impression on me. And I just remember being there at the hospital thinking, this is crazy that this guy left the house this morning just to go, you know, earn a living and feed his family. And now he's coming back missing a thumb, you know. And so, you know, we talk all the time about we want everybody to go home the way they came to work, and he did not do it that day. And so later on in life, when you know it came time to get a big boy job and get in the oil field, that's something I had interest in. By then, safety had started kind of coming around and working on some rigs and stuff myself. You know, I saw what the safety guys did and was one of the few guys out there that agreed that it made a difference, you know, having the safety guys around. And so that's why I got into it, but it was all because Kenny, not very smart, Duffer was his name, and shoved his hand into that flywheel there and cut off his thumb.
Wow. Anybody else want to jump in there? Hey, feel free to ask each other questions too, if or to respond to people with their stories, because I'm sure some of you have had similar experiences.
I've got
what about
one that follows up to that. David Bates, what made you decide to get into a career with OSHA?
Well, I was in college. I was the first intern or student co-op to be hired in the Dallas region, in Region 6. And the regional administrator, the area director in the area office in Little Rock came to our school and announced the program. He wanted to have an intern. And so I applied and did an internship, which extended my senior year out. But at the end, I had a job. I had a job in Dallas. So I spent about 10 years as a compliance officer in Dallas. And if I could piggyback off Chris, I've got a story. My first couple of years as a compliance officer, Dallas was booming. This was the mid 80s. And we were regularly investigating trench cave-in fatalities. And I think we investigated about 8 cave-in fatalities in about a year and a half. And I got so tired of inspecting trenches, but that's what we were doing. We were inspecting trenches and trying to prevent these. And we went from having 8 to having 1 to investigate in a matter of another year and a half. So whenever I still pull from that when I teach, because trench safety is very simple. So the KISS principle applies even today. You prepare the excavation, you prepare the hole before you allow employees to go into it. And so I always remember that when I'm teaching classes, or if I'm just giving a short speech, you know, keep it simple out there, because we still have, it's amazing to me, after all the years of conducting enforcement inspections and doing outreach activities and teaching, the simple things that still happen. Most of the fatalities you read about, or the fatalities that OSHA investigates, they're not complicated issues. They're still falling from elevations. They're still getting caught in machinery that's not locked out, tagged out, or guarded. There's also, I saw one the other day in the news. They're still walking grain in grain facilities, which is a big no-no. And so I've learned from that, and keeping it simple, and also using a lot of case studies whenever I teach and bringing these stories. So these stories help. These stories that we're talking about today help in educating the future workers and the workers that get callous to this. A lot of the things that happen out there, a lot of the oil and gas stuff that we see in Oklahoma, it's things that they've seen over and over again, and they get callous to it. And so I think that's something that I've drawn from and improved on with my training and educating over the years.
So Chris Kuiper.
How about our retired guys, Chris Kuiper or Pete?
Well, yeah, I was just going to ask if I could follow up with David on that. You know, one of the things that I've seen over the almost 50 years I've been in the business, and oil and gas side of it, is how cyclical it is, and and we lose talent that's got the knowledge of safety when we have the downturns, and then we end up with a kind of a new crew in place, and we have to go through the learning curve all over again, and it's I'd be interested to see if we go back and look at those downturns, how much as we come out of them, what the incident rates are. I've got to believe they're so much higher when that happens. And I know Chris Kuiper can speak to this as well, because being with mobile like he was, he experienced all these downturns as well. And it was just always amazing to me that we seemed like started over from scratch again, and it was always just, golly, now we got to do this over, and the training and the knowledge of getting safety out to people. We still fight that.
And you know what's so speaking of that, one thing that we saw a lot during COVID, right? The 2020 timeframe, 2021, things were slow. I mean, oil went negative for a little while, but these companies would get rid of they'd lay out, the contract companies would lay off the newer guys, right, and keep a handful of the guys that had been there around. So this guy's a supervisor. He used to run this pump truck 5 years ago. You know what I mean? He's been a supervisor ever since, sitting in the office or whatever. But now they send him back out to the field. They're shorthanded, they had to lay people off, so they send him back out to the field to run a pump truck. And it's like he's never seen one before. He's forgotten everything he knew about it. He's forgotten how to do it safely. And we had several seasoned guys who were supervisors who ended up, out of the office, back in the field, end up with injuries and accidents and stuff, because it's the same type of deal. You may as well have brought in a new guy. If they've been out of it too long, essentially you're starting from scratch.
Well, let me springboard off what you said, Pete. And you're right. We were very concerned about this whole issue when we had the downturns. And it was, you lost a lot of good talent, because not only did you find people leaving being asked to leave, but you found a lot of other older people saying, I'm done. I don't want to ride this train anymore. Then you get this crop of new workers. The interesting thing was, and I'm going to say this is just a general statement, I don't have a lot of data in front of me to back it up, but I can tell you we did look at it. Then you get a crop of new people that might have been flipping burgers at McDonald's yesterday, and today they're not going to be a roustabout, right? Well, yeah, you got to go through training, got to get them started. Usually that first year to 2 years, there wasn't a dramatic increase in serious incidents. You might have some scratches and cuts and bruises, but nothing serious, not lots of it, because they were scared. A lot of big equipment making a lot of big noises, and pumping units that had big counterweights on them, all sorts of good stuff. So at the end of the day, you found that the first year to 2 years was probably a fairly safe stretch, and they were getting a lot of training, and we were watching them like hawks. But what happens? You get complacent. And in the 3 to 5 year time frame, incidents started going up. So we can't just point at the downturns and say that's the problem. I think what we had to do was look at things from a system standpoint, say we really have to do this, not give them upfront training and then let them go be who they're going to be, but rather say we got to walk with them the whole way, ensure that we're identifying, assessing, and then managing the hazards. But I want to go back to something else. We're talking about, Dr. Martin mentioned that the retired guys, and I have to laugh because obviously I'm not totally retired. My youngest granddaughter, who is now 6, my daughter, I'll tell you a quick one. My daughter and I were talking the other day. She bought me this beautiful Santa Claus outfit. I'd never seen anything like it when the baby was born. I'm talking to her the other day, and I said, yeah, you want me to bring the suit because they live in Tennessee? And she said, I don't know. She said she is so observant that now she knows there's only really one Santa Claus, and that's her grandpa. She doesn't know it's grandpa, but she knows because I've been there several times and turned up. And she said she's so perceptive that now she can pick out people that she thinks are just cousins of Santa Claus, but she wants to see the Santa Claus. She said, Dad, I'm afraid she's going to recognize She's so observant. And I thought, there's a good lesson in safety right there too, right? Being super hyper observant is something that we have to do, especially with trainees. But I want to bring a little story about my personal, and I've investigated tons of incidents, been involved in all sorts of stuff in 45 years. But this one was one that I was in the middle of. We were doing, and I was fairly young in the job at Mobil at that time, probably been on staff maybe a couple of years. And they wanted us to go out and do safety inspections of all 65 some odd offshore platforms. And we were being given a helicopter. Turned out it was a lease helicopter and pilot. But they said, we want you to go out and do these inspections with an operations manager and the pipeline manager. And we want you guys to come tell us where we need to fix stuff. Great, fine, I'm all jazzed. Well, one trip we took, and I was living in New Orleans at the time. We went to Lake Charles because we were going to fly out from there out to offshore. And I was the last one to get on the helicopter, and the pilot flipped on the fuel switch, and I heard a kind of a funny gurgling sound. And I was a little bit concerned about that. And I told the pilot, I said, man, that was kind of weird. There was a weird noise. And he was looking at his gauges and said, oh, everything's fine. And he said that was just the fuel pump kicking it. So we close the doors, we take off, and the production manager was pretty cool about flying in the helicopters. The pipeline manager absolutely hated it every time we had to get on a helicopter. And so we take off Lake Charles. And those of you familiar with Lake Charles know there's a big lake, but nowadays it's all built up. In those days, there was a lot of sawgrass along the sides of the lake. So this was late 70s. All of a sudden, the pipeline guy throws his hard hat and hits me in the back of the head and says, look at the fuel gauge. And the fuel gauge is doing this. So I noticed the pilot, well, what's going on with the fuel gauge? He said, oh, crap. It starts going into auto rotation. We land in a bunch of sawgrass. All of us bail out of the helicopter. And the production manager and I were in one area, and the pipeline manager was a little bit, probably 20, 30 yards away. And so the pilot is away from the helicopter too. So he's standing kind of looking at the helicopter and trying to get somebody on the phone to come see what we could do. And so the production manager and I are standing probably in hip deep muck. You know, if you've been out in the swamps of Louisiana, you know what I'm talking about. Sawgrass cutting at you. The pipeline manager was standing in water and mud, and it's only up to his knees. He said, hey guys, come over here. It's much higher. The production manager just said, man, you better get out of there. That's an alligator trail. He hooks it up across. He went across the water to get back to the Well, when we got there, we all got back. Pilot opened up the engine compartment. It was level with jet fuel. Apparently something had gotten stuck. There's drains in the engine compartment. Something had clogged those drains, and that funny noise I heard was a leak in the gas fuel system. So one of the life lessons I really got out of that one was, we all know what happens when we say we assume something, right? Don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to challenge and say, look, we've been on this helicopter a number of times before, and I've never heard that sound before. I really would appreciate it if you'd get out and look and see what's going on. I could have done that, but I'm, young punk engineer. What do I know? And so I really would encourage anybody listening to this podcast, if you've been there, done that, you know what I'm talking about. Don't ever be afraid to ask questions. And it sounds like that should be something we'd all understand. But the reality check is, when you're young and you're breaking in, or you're then do a new job or a new assignment, you don't want to appear dumb, right?
Yeah.
And my dear departed mother-in-law said, you used to tell me when I tell her stories like this, she said, well, honey, the Lord takes care of babies and dummies, and you're no baby. Well, yeah, but I should have been so dumb that I didn't ask the question, what in the world is going on here? So
I tell you, my lesson from that is, don't fly in helicopters, because helicopters can't fly. Helicopters beat the wind into submission. I'd rather drive than fly in a helicopter. But that's a good story, Chris, and a lot of lessons from there. Mr. Carl, looks like
Chris, you highlighted the risk and the importance of addressing new hires as well as the lack of retention for experienced employees. And the risk of new hires is that not only do they not necessarily have any safety training, they also don't have any training in the operations that they're conducting out on the site. And I think DOT PHMSA has done a great job in providing or requiring a formal operator qualification program, OQ program, for new employees, or for all employees actually. And a lot of companies have implemented green hat safety programs where they at least give the new employees a intensive 2, 3, 4 days or a week of safety training. But it's important for companies to realize that new employees, especially those not involved in DOT, PHMSA, or pipeline operations, to give them a kind of an apprenticeship program where they accompany a qualified and experienced operator for pumper duties, or drilling rig hands, where they're actually working side by side with an experienced employee so that they can gather the knowledge they need to operate safely and operate correctly, because a lot of the risks are inherent in the job task that they are doing and may not necessarily be taught in a safety program.
No, you're right, Carl, but we also have to remember there's a lot of people working in other industries that don't have that level of preparation and contact, right? And that's where we see a lot of opportunity for continued improvement.
Right.
So, Sam,
Yeah,
you're in a podcast full of safety professionals, but you're a risk manager, a true risk manager.
Yep.
When we talk about risk, most of us are talking about from a safety standpoint, either physical, health, or even nowadays mental aspects of occupational safety and health from that type of risk standpoint. But you look at other risks, and certainly, as we've been talking about it this morning, it's just popping in my head, all these things that jump out to me from a risk standpoint when safety fails. So, you had Mr. P talk and others talk about the cycle that we have sometimes, and that hiring cycle really portends to some anecdotal evidence of the more new hires you bring on, the more likely you are to have injuries and so forth. But from the other aspects of risk, how do you manage that? Tell us a little bit about what you do in your career.
Yeah.
You manage total risk.
I was really struggling to come up with I took a couple of notes here, and I was like really struggling to come up with a story that made sense for this audience. And then forgive me, the last gentleman that spoke, it just triggered something in me. When I was early in my career in oil and gas, I had come out of conventional manufacturing, conventional services, and healthcare, and I'm always focused on what's this widget cost, or what's the cost of these bandages that I'm purchasing? How much money can I save? And I got hired at a company, Stone Energy, out in Lafayette, Louisiana, back in the mid 90s, and I worked for a gentleman named Eric Smith. Some of you guys may know Eric. He's been in the business a long time. And he hired me to run the strategic sourcing group, which I came in there. I had no idea what I was doing in oil and gas. And I went and focused on saving money in all these areas that what we call low-hanging fruit. And I was saving all this money. I was doing all that, what I thought was a great job. And he called me in his office about a year into my role. And he said, "Sam, you're doing one of the best jobs I've ever seen at saving money, but I may have to fire you." Talk about a praise and then come back down to earth. And he said, and here's why. You're not focused. You're stepping over dollars to save dimes. Where's your focus? And he said, he looked me straight in the eye and he says, we are not in the nickel and dime saving business. We need to be focused on how we're managing our subcontractors, our boats, our helicopters, and are they safe? If I have one accident in the field, that's going to cost me 10 times more than you saving 25 cents on office supplies, or you saving $10 on buying a new pumper truck. And it really sunk in. And so fast forward now, James, you introduced me. You said I'm the guy that wants to bridge these gaps. My entire career has been about bridging that gap, because in the procurement world, we tend to focus only on how much we can save the company in direct savings and dollars. And in safety, I've observed, and I'm not a safety professional, I'm learning, been around it for 15, 25, 20 years now, but I'm certainly not going to consider myself a safety professional. But we always focus on, from a safety perspective or an OQ, about training, about bringing everybody home safe. And I think there's a way that we can do both. And that is to spend our time being together in how we decide on who we're bringing on our well, who we're bringing on our boat, are they trained? Do we have a short service employee? I've been through a couple of cycles in the oil patch, and you guys are absolutely right. I was brought in when the company was moving up, right? I knew nothing about oil and gas. They couldn't find anybody, and that's why they hired me. They couldn't find anybody, so I had to be taught. And you had a gap. I noticed we had a gap. You had a lot of brand new folks, and you had a lot of guys with gray hair. You didn't have a whole lot of guys in between. And if we can build a model now that the folks like me, that we call us the bean counters, the guy that's always trying to squeeze money out of a vendor or trying to save money, if we could train our guys to be more in bed with you guys and vice versa, we can come up with a model that does that I call total cost management. We save real dollars and real lives simultaneously. So that's my evangelical version of what I think we can accomplish. But I think it's possible that we can get our focus where it needs to be, and that is saving lives and saving dollars, so that we can be physically sound, but also be physically sound as well. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that made any
No,
sense.
that made perfect sense. Sam, I want to say this, what we do informs what you do, right? And I think
Absolutely.
one of the things you're talking about is that if we don't do a good job on what we do to find out what's going on and look at the data and whatever, then we can't inform you, and you can't save the dollars and make sure we hire the right people, et cetera. And I just wanted to go back to what I think Chris and Carl were talking about. They really kind of wrapped in this whole idea of sights and sounds and smells and investigating and knowing. Chris, you said the pump noise, right? And in the helicopter. What are the things that are cluing you into these major issues that we have in the field? And, I mean, we all talk about stop work, and, you said the young guys sometimes don't do it because they're afraid to, and et cetera. But we've got to stay super informed so that when we pass along the fear to Sam, that he gets what we're talking about. And again, we're not the only department that probably informs you, Sam, right? I mean, it informs risk. What are some of the other departments that inform risk for you?
Well, the training department, it depends on the type of the organization you're in, right? Training that's not really focused on safety, right? There in some organizations, and I'm getting outside of oil and gas right now. You have, how to actually cut a board, right? You're over in classic construction. Those guys are always, hey, you're sending me subcontractors that they say they have long-term employees, but it turns out they've only got 10% long-term employees and everybody's green, right? So those guys we're interfaced with a lot. We're also, from a financial perspective and a legal perspective, when we're signing those MSAs and putting those MSAs in place, may not really take into consideration what safety really means, meaning from a financial standpoint, right? They say, we're always trying to, at the top line, because I spent a lot of time in the boardrooms of companies, and they're looking at how much money we can save. And I hate to break the news, it's a terrible thing, but a life equates in a lot of companies to a dollar figure or a
Right.
thumb or an elbow or a knee. And
Right.
if we can show how Chris is keeping a guy from getting his thumb cut off, and I'm now paying Chris the wage where he wants to stay with my organization, and I've got subs that he's managing that might cost a little bit more, but they have a better safety program and a better training program. I just now saved the company $1 million from an erroneous thumb getting cut off, right?
Yeah.
They
Yep.
care about the dollars more than they care about the human being. It's not true to say that the board doesn't care about the human being, but they care about the human being and the dollar.
Well, let me
Probably
say this.
equally.
I started out in operations and executive at an oil company before I got into safety. Profit is good and more profit's better. And we have two extremes that we're trying to bridge the gaps on in perspectives. Some safety people don't understand if we don't make a profit, we're not going to be here. That profit pays your salary because they want to reduce risk down to zero, where there is absolutely no risk. You know, I've done a million times with that with students that I've trained over the years, and people I've talked to and tried to mentor. If you give them the option to reduce risk to zero, and by reducing risk to zero, we got to spend $200 million. They'll spend $200 million when we could control the risk and spend $10 million. And everybody's equally as safe. You cannot eliminate all hazards. There's a cost to eliminating all hazards, right? So I think there's an educational aspect in the safety profession that needs to learn. We can't reduce risk always to zero. We have to be able to compromise and understand there's a cost to some of these things. On the other side, there's indirect cost when we don't, and we get people hurt, we get people killed. David Bates shows up with OSHA and starts enforcing the regulations as he should, right? And then we get into litigation, and Dr. Martin and I are doing a lot of consulting work around subject matter expert testimony in wrongful death, gross negligence, and OSHA investigation defense. And I'll tell you, once you start down that road into litigation, right, all these decisions that people have made in the company come out in the deposition. Why did you make that decision? How did you justify that expenditure? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? So like David said earlier, hindsight's always 20/20. You know, once we investigate an accident, most of the time it reveals itself how it could have been prevented. And if somebody had just had the foresight to anticipate those hazards, right? But there's constant pull, like you said, between procurement and safety. And I think both need to learn. Safety professionals need to learn. We still got to make money as a business. We can't reduce all risk to zero. Procurement people got to learn. We have to come up with whatever risk is acceptable. What's the risk that's acceptable within the confines of the OSHA regulations? And when
You
we
can't do that, James, without working together.
Bingo.
Without working together.
Well, and also another thing that we're talking about people learning stuff, the operations people, the money people, and so on, elsewhere in the organization have to understand that, yeah, maybe safety isn't an income stream, right? We're just spending money. So you can see how much we spend, but it's really hard to see how much you've
How much you
saved.
save.
Very
Yeah.
hard to.
That is really difficult to make them understand that. And it's like, hey, yeah, you may think it's expensive now, but get rid of me and what we do and so on, and see how long you're around, you know. So that's another part of the
Chris, to your
puzzle.
point, that's
Yeah.
why I want to build the bridge, because if you're like, I'm a CPSM, I'm a CPM, I've taken classes, I've got all these certifications. It's our job, if we're good at our job, to help you articulate, right? It's your job to know what's an unsafe environment. It's my job to take those indirect savings and show how they do negatively or positively affect the bottom line. And that's where that bridge, I think, is most critical. So you can sell me on the idea we got to be safe, and I can sell the board that safety saved us this, right?
Man,
Well,
Sam,
Sam,
don't tell my students that, because everybody's going to want a procurement specialist on their team then, because we always talk about getting the cost of safety and risk and all that kind of stuff and doing it all ourselves. But I mean, man, if our job is just to get you what you need and your job is to get what you need and pass it on to the next person, I'm sold. My
In a
students are
perfect
sold, right? 'Cause
world,
that's hard
that's
for
how it's
us.
supposed to work. In a perfect
That's
world.
hard for us.
It's
And just
Dr. Martin, you asked what other departments or teams inform safety, and I think the engineering and operations teams through the management of change process inform safety. I think safety departments and safety professionals need to pay attention to the management of change documents or proposals that come across their desk, because it informs what safety training needs to be implemented for people who are changing locations or equipment or adding tasks to their daily routine.
I think the other side of this, Sam, is that a lot of safety professionals, I know when I was growing up, I'd ask the students, what's an NPV? And their answer was, well, that's a Mazda, isn't it? No, net present value. Most of us don't really get any education in how do you account for money? Now, what's the internal rate of return? What's the return on the investment? If you understand those things, it's a whole lot easier to explain to someone, this is why we need to invest $500 here. And you might argue, well, if I don't invest it, I'm willing to take the risk that nothing's going to happen. Okay, that's why you buy car insurance. And if you don't buy automobile insurance and you take that risk and you get into a wreck, it can devastate you. Are you really willing to play that game? And we have to come up with and I think James and I have talked about this, and he made the point, it's critical. We can't fix everything. So if we come back and say we have looked at it and can prove with good data that the statistical probability of someone getting hurt or killed doing this is X.
Yep.
And don't just say 10 to the minus 6. People will say, well, what is that? That's 1 in a million. Let's put it in plain English, right?
Put it in English that people can understand, right, Chris? I mean,
yeah, exactly. And so you give them that, and then you can say, okay, are you willing to hedge the bet that you're going to be able to get by a million times doing this without somebody getting hurt?
And Chris, to me, it goes down back to this. It's 2 acronyms back to back. It's CYA with an MOC.
Yeah.
The two of us come together and we say, this safety is going to save me this amount of money, or it's going to cost me this amount of money, and then it eliminates this amount of risk, and it doesn't fit within our decision tree, then pass it upstream for an MOC.
This is a huge area here that we're getting into, and I don't know if we want to get on this episode or the next, but agreeing on risk tolerance, right, is huge, because Sam's risk tolerance versus every one of ours risk tolerance, we're all different. I would tend to say maybe us safety professionals that have been in 20, 30, 40 years, we probably have similar, but Sam's idea of risk tolerance and our idea of risk tolerance and company owners' idea of risk tolerance are all different. So I'm gonna hedge that and save that for our next episode. We'll talk about risk tolerance and how we get to that. But before we end this episode, James, with your permission, I'd like to go to the speed round of aha moments, and I'm gonna use a couple examples here that you guys have given us today. Sam, your aha moment was your ass is getting fired if you don't stop stepping over dollars to get to pennies, right? Chris, your aha moment was you're in a helicopter, you hear a noise, you didn't say shit, and you dumped into the drink. Okay, mine, for example, was I worked in hazardous waste remediation, and I was digging out 50,000 gallon jet fuel tanks on Pease Air Force Base. And the manager said, run down that sand slope, 20-foot drop, jump over the water around the concrete pad, and hold the stick for the survey rod. And I said, no. Aha moment, right? Aha moment. Does anybody else want to add to the speed round? Aha moment. James.
I got mine. It was in April. It was at the end of April in 2010. I'm sitting in a cigar shop in New Orleans, Louisiana, watching the Deepwater Horizon burn, and I can smell the diesel fuel type smell wafting over the city of New Orleans. And I said, I got to be part of that. I got to be part of something that prevents that. I didn't know what that was yet, but I was extremely fired up and motivated to make sure that that never happened again.
Cool. Chris, your aha moment was the thumb, right? Did you have anything else during your career that has been an aha moment?
Yeah. I mean, excuse me, just different things that have kind of shaped where I am now. You get into safety, and you're the safety cop. You're out there, and I'm gonna lay down the hammer. And one of the things that really changed my approach and changed the ways that I communicate with people is giving a safety meeting to truck drivers, and I hated it, because the truck drivers love to back the safety guy into a corner, right? And, well, what about this situation? And what about if that happens? And so on. And the day I finally realized I don't have to answer all these questions. I can say the chances of that happening are very slim, and we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Until then, here's the rules, here's the policies, here's the procedures. And once you finally realize that, I don't have to answer all these hypotheticals. We'll cross that crazy bridge when we get there. It helped me to connect with those guys a whole lot more.
Chris, I'll say truck drivers, construction workers, and I will say crane operators. I work for a crane company, and it was always like, well, what if, this and this happens? And I kind of was like, I mean, come on, guys. Let's deal with the right here now. Pete.
Said if I had a truck, go ahead, Chris, Pete.
Aha moments I think that we can bring to bear here. It'll bridge what Sam's talking about and what we're talking about in the safety side is, what is the cost of an accident? And if you go back and you look at the different costs for each incident that takes place, then you can justify safety, you can justify spending money, and particularly if you can show that you're bringing accidents down within that company. So, that people have to understand that there's really cost to these things. Side note, back in the 80s, a thumb or a finger was $7,500. That's what people got for them when they lost it.
It's a lot more into it than $7,500 any day of the week, whether it's today, yesterday, or 20 years ago. Perfect. David, your trenching comes to bear here. I want to ask you, you didn't take that famous OSHA video where we've all seen the OSHA inspector on the surface talking to the guy standing in the hole saying, you better get out of there, you better get out of there. You didn't take that, did you?
Did not, but I had a similar aha moment. The many fatalities that I investigated in my 10 years in the field as a compliance officer, there were a few that I arrived at the scene before the body had been removed. So I get to see the person that passed away. And my very first trench cave-in fatality, where there was a body, the fire department was standing around waiting on a trench shield, and it was just body recovery. And that stuck with me. And that's where the aha moment of keep it simple, the basic things to do to prevent falls and trench cave-ins and lockout, tagout, and machine guarding issues. Keep it simple. And that stuck with me all these years, watching that body being removed out of that excavation.
Been there. Thank you, David. Carl, you want to take us out? You got something? My
aha moment was needing to address the people where they are. My first job at a unionized represented manufacturing plant really illustrated this for me, where we did a very comprehensive indoor air quality and sampling program, and we just issued the results of the report to the union local. The immediate response we got back was, well, you hired these people to tell you what you wanted to hear, what management wanted to hear, and that we didn't find any toxic exposures amongst the employees. The important thing there should have been for us in the safety team department to preface that with an explanation of what's important to them, what the exposures could be or are, regardless of what the level is, whether it's a toxic level that exceeds a time-weighted average or not. but what the dangers of those exposures are and how to protect them, and then give them the report so that they could actually digest it with some knowledge before making a knee-jerk response that, that's what you wanted to hear. So.
Wonderful takeaway, Carl. Perception, unfortunately, or fortunately for people in the field, perception is everything, right? People, you can tell them all you want, the toxic exposures aren't what they think them to be. But what people perceive to be harmful, they need to be addressed where they are, right? Because not everybody knows what we know as safety professionals, environmental professionals, etc. So at the risk of running long, I'm going to throw it to James and have him take us out. This conversation has been amazing, at least from my perspective. I think we should do this more often. I love this. So, James.
Absolutely. And for all of our listeners, part 2 will be the next episode with the same group and maybe additional guests. So if you're tuning into us and you want to hear more of this type of our Christmas present back to you, the following episode will be part 2 of the discussion with this esteemed group. Thank you all for an amazing 2024. The Risk Matrix is gaining viewers week after week after week. Hey, Dr. Martin, I read a report today that we've been viewed almost 30,000 times. 30,000 times across our platforms on YouTube, the Veriforce YouTube channel, and Spotify, and on LinkedIn. So thank you very much for our listeners. Hey, if you're just now joining us, you can find us every Tuesday. A new episode drops of the Risk Matrix. You'll find it first on LinkedIn, then on Veriforce's YouTube channel, then on Spotify. Go over and hit that like button, baby. Hit that like button and subscribe. And that way you'll get notified when new episodes come every Tuesday around noon Central. If you're a new listener, we're on our 70-something episode, going back to 2003. So there's an entire library of episodes that you can check out in any medium that you want. We thank you very much for being part of this team. Merry Christmas, happy holidays, and roll tide.
Roll tide.
And until next time, y'all keep bringing those workers home safe. Out.